For 20 years my own son made me believe I had killed his father. "You'll pay for this until the last day of your life," he would say while hitting me. The truth was hidden in his wallet the whole time. Good morning, my dear viewers. May God bless each one of you watching me right now. My name is Betty Graham Williams. I'm 72 years old, and today I live here in Brownsville, Texas, right on the border with Mexico. I ended up in this little corner of America after much struggle, much pain, but also much personal growth. These days, my greatest pleasure is making hand-woven wool rugs dyed with natural materials. Would you believe I learned this from my Mexican grandmother when I was just a little girl? She taught me how to prepare the dyes using onion skins for orange tones, spinach leaves for greens, annatto for reds. And now, with these old hands, I continue weaving stories into every rug I make. I have a special little room at the back of my house that I call my studio. That's where my vertical loom stands, which my old friend Henry helped me build. The walls are all lined with colorful yarn, each holding a different secret from nature. The smell of wool mixed with the aromas of the plants I use for dyeing creates a perfume that's uniquely mine, that brings me peace. I started dedicating myself more to this craft about 5 years ago, when I finally managed to have my own little house. Before that, I couldn't even think about having a space just for me. My life was very different, you know? It was like living in a golden cage from the outside, but one lined with thorns on the inside. You smile at passers-by, but cry when no one's looking. The rugs I make are all inspired by the landscape here on the border. I use the sunset tones of the Texas plains, the blue-green of the Rio Grande, the golden hue of the fields in summer. Each piece carries a piece of my story. I've sold some at the little crafts fair in the town square, but truth be told, I make them more for the joy of creating than for the money. It's my therapy, as young people say nowadays. From my window, while I weave, I can see the town square and, on clear days, even a little stretch of the river that divides the United States from Mexico. It's beautiful. In the late afternoon, I set aside my loom, prepare a sweet tea like only we Southerners know how to make, and watch the comings and goings. Children returning from school, young couples, old folks playing checkers. Life is like that, a coming and going of stories. And speaking of stories, before I continue with mine, I'd like to make a special request to you watching me. If this video is touching your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This helps this artisan grandma here reach more people who might need to hear what I have to say. And tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning while having coffee as I like to do, after lunch during your rest time, or late at night before bed? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and how my story reached you. Let me know, okay? Let's create a web of kindness, like the threads of my rugs. You know, my dears, life prepares such surprises for us. Sometimes we think we know people, especially those we raised, that we saw being born, growing up. But there are times when we discover we don't even know ourselves. That's what happened to me. For years, I carried a guilt that wasn't mine, a weight that bent my back more than age itself. And all because of a lie my own son made me believe. But before I tell you how I discovered the truth, I need to go back to when I was still a girl running through the fields of Brownsville, with no idea what life had in store for me. Block 2, Childhood and Marriage. I was born and raised right here in Brownsville, in a simple house near the river. My father, Isaac Graham, was a ranch hand. He worked with cattle on the big properties in the region. A man of few words, but with an enormous heart. I remember him coming home smelling of the open fields, with his muddy boots and that wide-brimmed hat he never took off his head, not even to sleep, as my mother used to joke. As for my mother, Dorothy Williams, she was the daughter of a Mexican woman and an American man. My grandmother, Carmen, came from Matamoros, just across the river, and brought with her all that knowledge of weaving and dyeing that is my livelihood today. Mom was a strong woman, one of those who woke before the sun and only rested after the last star had appeared in the sky. She was the one who tended our vegetable garden, the chickens, and still took in laundry to help with household expenses. We were 5 siblings, me, the oldest, then came Alfred, who unfortunately left us too soon to a fever that caught everyone by surprise. Nancy, who now lives in San Antonio with her children. Samuel, who followed in our father's footsteps and became a ranch hand. And little Margaret, who God took when she was still a baby. Those times were hard, my dears. We didn't have the vaccines and doctors we have today. Being born was already a victory, making it to adulthood even more so. Our house was very simple, made of wood with a dirt floor. It had only 2 rooms, one for my parents and another where we siblings slept together on a large mat that my grandmother Carmen had made. The kitchen was the heart of the home, with a wood stove that stayed lit all day in winter, heating the entire house. There my mother prepared the homemade bread she sold to supplement our income, and my grandmother taught me the secrets of plants and colors while preparing her natural dyes. Outside, we had a yard with some fruit trees, a peach tree, an orange tree, and a huge fig tree where we used to hide to play. We also had a small chicken coop and a vegetable garden that provided almost everything we ate. Near the well, my grandmother had a small patch just for dyeing plants, annatto, indigo, yarrow, chamomile, and others she brought when visiting relatives in Mexico. My childhood was simple but full of freedom. I walked to the county school, almost an hour each way. I remember that during heavy rain seasons, when the river rose, we had to take a huge detour, and sometimes couldn't make it at all. On those days, my grandmother would take the opportunity to teach me more about wool and dyeing. "Learn this, Betty," she would say with that heavy accent, mixing English with Spanish, "because one day you'll need to support yourself, and no man will be able to take this knowledge from you, honey." It was as if she was predicting what I would go through many years later. On Sunday afternoons, when my father wasn't working, we would go down to the riverbank. He would fish while we children played in the shallow water. Mom would bring sweet tea and fried cornbread that she made especially for these occasions. Sometimes, someone would show up playing an accordion and a dance circle would form right there on the riverbank. They were moments of simple joy that I cherish in my heart. During the week, the routine was tough even for us children. We would wake up with the rooster's crow, have some milk and coffee, and head off to school. When we returned, there was work waiting. Fetching water from the well, gathering firewood, helping in the garden, looking after younger siblings. Being the oldest, I also helped Mom with the customers' laundry and assisted my grandmother in spinning the wool that neighbors would bring. When winter came with that cutting north wind, we would gather around the wood stove. My father would tell ghost stories about headless women and werewolves that were said to appear on full moon nights near the International Bridge. I would tremble with fear, but loved those moments. It was on one of those cold nights that I met Ernest, the son of the store owner where my father bought tobacco and coffee. He had come to deliver an order and ended up staying for some tea with us. At that time, I was about 15 and thought I knew everything about life. Little did I imagine that this broad-smiled, green-eyed boy would completely change my destiny. Things started to get difficult when my father fell ill. He had gone to work on a rainy day and came back with a cough that never went away. He wasted away, wasting away. The doctor said it was his lungs, but back then we didn't have today's treatments. When I turned 16, he departed this world, leaving Mom with 4 children to raise alone. That's when Ernest appeared with a proposal that seemed like salvation. He wanted to marry me and move my family to a better house in the more central part of town. He had inherited a piece of land from his grandfather and was prospering. Mom cried, but said it was a blessing from God. And so, without much time to think, I found myself engaged before I even understood what love really was. Life, my dears, sometimes takes turns we never imagined. And that's how I went from being the girl who ran freely through the fields of Brownsville to becoming Mrs. Williams, wife of a man everyone in town respected, but who inside the home, well, that's a story I'll tell next. Block 3. The marriage and the accident. The marriage to Ernest started like a fairy tale, at least in the eyes of others. We moved into a nice house near the town square of Brownsville, with polished wooden floors and large windows that let in that golden late afternoon light. My mother and my siblings came to live with us, as Ernest had promised. In the beginning, he was all smiles and kindness to everyone. "Mrs. Dorothy, you don't need to take in laundry anymore. Now you can rest a bit," he would say to my mother, who would cry with gratitude. Alfred was no longer with us, but Nancy, Samuel, and I felt like we had won the lottery. Who would have thought that a ranch hand's daughter would now be living in one of the nicest houses in town? In the first few months of marriage, I discovered I was expecting a child. Ernest was so happy that he threw a party in the backyard, inviting half the town. He slaughtered a whole calf for barbecue and even hired musicians from San Antonio to play. "It's going to be a boy, I'm sure. And we'll name him Stephen, after my father," he would say, already making plans. And wouldn't you know, he was right? 9 months later, our Stephen was born, a strong boy with his father's green eyes. Ernest filled the house with gifts, bought a carved wooden crib specially ordered from Houston, and even a rocking horse for the boy, knowing it would be years before he could play with it. It was around this time that I began to see Ernest's other side, the side no one else saw. It started with little things, a complaint about the seasoning in the food, a shout when the baby cried too much, a furious look when I was talking to an acquaintance on the street. "Are you flirting?" he would ask later, through clenched teeth, squeezing my arm until it left marks. When Stephen was 2 years old, my mother fell ill. "Cancer," the doctors said. There wasn't much that could be done back then, especially in a small town like ours. She wasted away gradually, and in her final days she asked to be alone with me. "Betty, my daughter," she whispered, holding my hand with those already thin fingers. "You're not happy with Ernest, are you? I can see it in your eyes. Does he hurt you?" I denied it, of course. What else could I do? We were all dependent on him now. My younger siblings were studying thanks to him. We had a roof over our heads and food on the table thanks to him. And there was Stephen, my little boy. Where would we go if I confessed the truth? After Mom passed away, things got worse. It was as if Ernest had lost the last reason to control himself. The yelling turned into shoves, the shoves turned into slaps, and the slaps... Well, you understand. Everything was a reason. Cold food, a poorly ironed shirt, Stephen's crying, or simply because his day hadn't been good. I remember one night when Stephen was about 5. He came into our room because he had a nightmare. Ernest, who had drunk more than usual, got up furiously and yelled at the boy, "Go back to your room! Men don't fear dreams!" When I tried to intervene, I received such a strong slap that I fell to the floor. Stephen saw everything with those wide little eyes. It was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last. Over time, my siblings went their separate ways. Nancy married and moved to San Antonio. Samuel found work at a big ranch near Corpus Christi and visited us rarely. I was left alone with Ernest and Stephen, in a house that increasingly felt like a prison. The boy grew up witnessing that violence. At first, he would cry and try to defend me. "Leave Mom alone!" he would shout, with his thin little arms trying to hold back his father. But what can a child do against a grown man? Ernest would simply push him aside and continue. Over time, I noticed something that chilled my blood. Stephen stopped crying when his father abused me, stopped trying to prevent it, started observing, silently, with an expression I couldn't decipher. When he entered adolescence, everything got even worse. Stephen started to imitate his father. If the food wasn't to his liking, he would bang on the table and demand I make something else. If his clothes weren't perfectly ironed, he would throw them on the floor for me to wash again. He was becoming a little earnest, and that frightened me more than any aggression. I tried to talk to him once when we were alone. "Son, it doesn't have to be like this. Your father, his way isn't right." He looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You always deserve it. Dad says you're good for nothing, and I see it's true." Those words hurt me more than any physical blow. My own son, my boy, the one I had rocked so many nights, was turning against me. In town, we were the perfect family. Ernest was respected, owner of several properties and a construction materials store he had opened. Stephen was a good student, participated in rodeos, was admired. I was the exemplary wife, always well-dressed at Sunday services, helping at church events, smiling when asked if everything was all right. "Of course everything's all right," I would reply, with a smile so rehearsed that even I no longer noticed its falsity. The years passed like this. When Stephen turned 17, Ernest gave him what every boy that age dreamed of: a car. It wasn't new, but it was in good condition, a blue Chevette that my husband bought from an acquaintance who was moving to Los Angeles. "Now you're a man," said Ernest, handing the keys to his son on his birthday. "But remember, you can only drive when I allow it, and always with my permission. You don't have a license yet." Stephen was radiant. He spent hours washing and polishing that car as if it were a treasure. Occasionally, Ernest would allow him to drive to the ranch we had bought on the outskirts of town, always under supervision. It was during this time that my life began to completely fall apart. On a Sunday in May, with that slight chill that already announced winter approaching, Stephen asked to take the car. He wanted to show it to his friends, drive around town. "No way," said Ernest. "Today we're all going to the ranch. I need to check on the new cattle I bought." Stephen got sulky, slammed the door to his room, but eventually accepted. The three of us went in the car, with Ernest driving, me in the passenger seat, and Stephen in the back, still with a long face. On the way back, it was already getting dark. The dirt road connecting the ranch to town was slippery because of a light drizzle that was falling. Ernest and Stephen started arguing about school. My husband had discovered that his son had missed several classes the previous week. "You think I don't know what you're up to? Skipping class to hang out with bums?" Ernest shouted. "You don't know anything. You're always too busy with your business," Stephen responded, with an audacity he rarely showed with his father. The argument heated up. Ernest took one hand off the wheel to point his finger in his son's face through the rearview mirror. That's when it all happened. The car skidded on a curve, went off the road, and rolled down an embankment. I only remember screams, the sound of metal twisting, and then silence. A heavy silence, interrupted only by the sound of rain on the crumpled roof of the car. When I regained consciousness, I was in the Brownsville hospital. I had broken my arm and some ribs, but I was alive. The first question I asked was about Ernest and Stephen. The nurse lowered her eyes. "Your son is fine, ma'am. Some cuts and a concussion, but he'll recover. Your husband—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood from her look. Ernest had not survived. The impact was direct on the driver's side. He died instantly, they said later. When I was finally able to see Stephen 2 days later, he was sitting on the hospital bed, looking out the window. He had a large bandage on his forehead and several scratches on his arms. "Son," I began, not knowing exactly what to say. "How do you console a teenager who has just lost his father?" He turned slowly and looked at me with something I had never seen before in his eyes. It wasn't sadness, nor fear. It was hatred. A pure, concentrated hatred that made me take a step back. "It's your fault," he said, in a low, controlled voice that immediately reminded me of Ernest. "If you weren't always provoking him, arguing, he wouldn't have been distracted. You killed my father." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to defend myself, explain that I hadn't even spoken during their argument, that it was an accident, that the road was slippery, but Stephen just kept repeating, like a mantra, "It's your fault, it's your fault." At that moment, something broke between us, something that would never be fixed again. And it was there, in that hospital room, that the true hell of my life began. Block 4A. The Years of Manipulation. After Ernest's funeral, we returned to a house that seemed both larger and emptier at the same time. The people in town treated us with that pity mixed with curiosity that always accompanies tragedies. They brought food, offered help, asked if we needed anything, but always with sidelong glances at me, as if trying to see if there was something different, something that would explain why the accident had happened. Gradually, the whispers began. I don't know exactly how, but Stephen's version of the accident spread through town like wildfire. Mrs. Williams was arguing with her husband, they said. She distracted him while driving, others commented. Soon, the looks of pity transformed into something different, something harder, accusatory. The visits decreased, the condolence calls stopped. Even at church, where I had always been well received, the ladies would subtly move away when I sat on the pews. The widow who killed her husband. That's how they saw me now. At home, the situation was even worse. Stephen, who had just turned 18 shortly after the accident, took control of everything with frightening authority. As an only child, he inherited most of his father's assets, the construction materials store, the ranch, a bank account. The house where we lived was now his too, although I was entitled to a part. You're not going to touch anything, he told me coldly, a few days after the accident, while rummaging through his father's documents. You don't have the capacity to manage any of this. I'll take care of everything now. I tried to argue, to say that I was his mother, that I was still young and could learn. He looked at me with those eyes so similar to his father's, but now full of a contempt that Ernest had never shown even in his worst moments. You've done enough damage. You killed my father. You should be grateful I still let you stay in this house. And so my new life began. If with Ernest I lived in a type of prison, with Stephen it was something even worse. It was a prison without visible bars, built with guilt, shame, and manipulation. Every morning, he made a point of reminding me what I had done. "Sleep well, Mom?" he would ask as we had breakfast. "Dad used to say you snored so much he couldn't sleep. I guess now he can finally rest in peace, right?" Little jabs, day after day, week after week, month after month. Stephen was meticulous in his abuse, careful never to leave visible marks. He didn't need to hit me like his father did. He had discovered a much more effective weapon: words. "You know nobody in town respects you, right?" he would casually comment as we had dinner. Today at the store, Mrs. Genoveva asked if I wasn't ashamed to be the son of a woman like you. I said yes, I am, but God gave me this cross to bear. I tried to defend myself, to say it was all a lie, that it had been an accident, but he would just smile that cold way and say, "No use lying, Mom. You and I know the truth." A year after the accident, Stephen decided that I should no longer go out alone. "It's for your own good," he explained with fake concern. "People are still very upset. They might do something bad to you." At first, I thought it really was concern. After all, he was my son. Even with everything that was happening, I wanted to believe there was still some love there. But I soon realized it was just another form of control. When I needed to go to the market or the pharmacy, Stephen would accompany me or send someone from the store. At church, he made a point of sitting next to me, always smiling politely at everyone, like the devoted son taking care of his troubled mother. "Just look at what a good young man he is," I heard a lady comment as we left the church. "Taking care of this mother who only brought misfortune." At home, he controlled everything. The phone was in the living room, where he could hear all my conversations. Not that many people called me. Most friends had distanced themselves. My sister Nancy would call sometimes, but whenever I answered with Stephen nearby, I would pretend, say that everything was fine, that we were adjusting. Once, she insisted on coming to visit us. She stayed for a weekend. Stephen was the perfect host, attentive, polite, always serving tea, asking if she wanted anything else. When we were alone in the kitchen, Nancy looked me in the eyes and asked in a low voice, "Is everything really okay, Betty? You look..." I almost told her. I almost let the whole truth escape. But what could I say? That my son was psychologically torturing me? That he blamed me for his father's death? That I myself had begun to believe that maybe I really was guilty? Just tired, I replied, forcing a smile. I still haven't gotten used to being without Ernest. When she left, Stephen closed the door and turned to me with an icy look. What have you been telling her? I saw the way you two were whispering in the kitchen. Nothing, son. We just talked about sister things. He came closer, stood inches from my face. I could feel his hot breath when he whispered, If you tell anyone the lies you make up, I will make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. Understood? I understood, and I kept quiet. At night, alone in my room, the same one I had shared with Ernest for so many years, I would cry quietly into the pillow so Stephen wouldn't hear. I would look at my hands, still agile despite everything, and think of my grandmother Carmen and all she had taught me about wool and dyeing. One day, you'll need to support yourself, she would say. It seemed like a prophecy now. I started doing small jobs hidden from Stephen. First, they were simple gloves and caps that I sold to the owner of the general store in exchange for wool and supplies. Then, I made some more elaborate pieces, blankets and shawls with patterns my grandmother had taught me. Where did this money come from? Stephen asked one day when he saw me putting some bills in the dresser drawer. Mrs. Smith from the general store asked me to make some caps for her grandchildren. She paid me a little bit, I replied, trying to appear casual. He took the money from my hand, examined the bills, and then put them in his pocket. You don't need this. I give you everything you need. If you want to occupy your time, how about cleaning this house better? And so, even this small freedom was taken from me. The years passed with agonizing slowness. Stephen graduated from high school, then went to study business in San Antonio, but returned every weekend to take care of me. In reality, to check if I was still under his control. When he turned 25, he decided it was time to get married. The bride was Claire, daughter of a local merchant. A beautiful and educated young woman who seemed genuinely in love with him. In the few times we talked without Stephen around, she was kind to me, but I noticed she had already heard his version of the accident. Her eyes had that mixture of pity and caution when she spoke to me. You must feel so lonely in this big house, she commented once while helping me wash the dishes from the engagement dinner. But don't worry, I'll take good care of your son. On the wedding day, I stayed at the back of the church. Stephen insisted that I go. What would people think if my own mother wasn't present, but made it clear that I shouldn't stand out. I wore a discreet gray dress and sat in a distant pew. When the pastor asked who would give away the groom, it was Stephen's uncle, Ernest's brother, who stood up. I watched everything with a lump in my throat, remembering the baby I had cradled, the boy I had taught to take his first steps, the child who had once called me Mommy with love. After the wedding, Stephen and Claire moved to a new house on the other side of town. It was the first time in 8 years that I was truly alone. In a way, it was a relief not to have to endure his comments and accusatory looks daily. But the isolation also brought its own form of torture. 3 times a week, religiously, Stephen would stop by to visit me. Always with the same ritual. He would enter without knocking, inspect the house to see if it was clean, ask questions about who I had talked to, where I had gone. He would leave money for the week's expenses, always the bare minimum needed, and leave. You're lucky to have me, you know, he would say as he left the counted bills on the table. Another son would have put you in a nursing home after what you did. Believe me, my dears, over time you even begin to believe this kind of thing. A lie repeated 1,000 times gradually transforms into a distorted truth in our minds. Every time I thought about the accident, the memory became more blurred, more confused. Had I really argued with Ernest? Had it really been my fault? At night, alone in that big empty house, I would have nightmares. I would see the car rolling over, hear the screams, feel the impact. And I would always wake up with the same feeling of guilt and despair. When Claire got pregnant, I thought perhaps things might change. A grandchild could bring some light into my gloomy life. Maybe Stephen would soften with the arrival of a child. Maybe he would remember what a father's love, or a mother's, was like. One afternoon, while sorting through some old clothes in the attic, I found a box with Stephen's baby things that I had saved. Tiny clothes, wool booties that I had made myself, a silver rattle that Ernest had bought. I decided to do something special for my future grandchild. Using the techniques my grandmother had taught me, I started weaving a blanket with natural wool that I had hidden at the bottom of the closet. When Stephen discovered what I was doing, he tore the work from my hands. "You really think I'm going to let my child use something made by your hands?" he asked, ripping apart the blanket I had worked on for weeks. The same hands that caused the death of his grandfather? It was at that moment that something inside me finally broke completely. I looked at my son, the man my son had become, and recognized nothing of the baby I had nursed, the boy I had protected, the teenager I had supported. It was as if a stranger stood before me, wearing my son's face like a mask. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. When the sun rose, I had made a decision. No matter how, I needed to find a way to escape that prison of guilt and shame. I needed to recover something of myself before there was nothing left. What I didn't know was that the key to my liberation was much closer than I imagined, hidden in the wallet of the man who had become my tormentor. Block 4B, the breaking point. It was a Tuesday in fall when everything changed. I remember it as if it were yesterday. The sky was gray, with that fine drizzle so common in Brownsville at this time of year. The oak trees in the square had already lost almost all their leaves, forming a brown carpet on the ground. That morning, Stephen showed up earlier than usual. He entered in a hurry, without the usual inspection of the house. He seemed nervous, checking his watch constantly. "Mom, I need you to pay the electric bill today. I completely forgot, and it's due today. The money is in my wallet, in the car." He threw the car keys on the table and headed to the bathroom. "I'm going to take a quick shower and need to leave in a hurry. Claire isn't feeling well. I'm taking her to the doctor in San Antonio." I stood there holding the keys, surprised by the request. In almost 10 years since the accident, it was the first time Stephen had asked me to do something like this. He always controlled everything personally, especially money. "Hurry up, Mom!" he shouted from the bathroom. "The wallet is in the glove compartment. Take only the money for the bill, nothing more." With trembling hands, I went out to the garage where the car was parked. It was a new model, no longer the old Chevette from the accident. That one had been destroyed, of course. This was a silver Monza, which Stephen had bought with money from the store. I opened the glove compartment and found the brown leather wallet. I could hear the shower running inside the house. With fingers clumsy from nervousness, I opened the wallet looking for the money. That's when I noticed a side compartment, half hidden, closed with a small snap button. I don't know what came over me at that moment, curiosity, intuition, or perhaps just the unconscious desire to find something, anything, that would give me some power over the situation in which I lived. Whatever it was, I opened that secret compartment. Inside was a paper yellowed by time, folded several times until it formed a small rectangle. I carefully unfolded it, and my heart almost stopped when I recognized what it was. A clipping from the Brownsville Chronicle, the local weekly newspaper. The headline jumped out at me like a slap: "Fatal Accident on Williams Ranch Road." It was the news about the accident that had killed Ernest. The date at the top of the newspaper, May 22nd, 1986, a week after the tragedy. With my heart racing, I began to read. Businessman Ernest Williams, 42, died last Sunday in a car accident on the road connecting his ranch to the town of Brownsville. According to police investigations, the vehicle, a blue Chevette, was being driven by the victim's son, Stephen Williams, 17, who did not yet have a driver's license. The young man lost control on a curve due to the wet road, and the vehicle rolled down an embankment. Ernest Williams, who was in the passenger seat, did not survive his injuries and died at the scene. His wife, Betty Graham Williams, 34, who was in the back seat, suffered fractures but is doing well. Young Stephen had only minor injuries. Police are investigating the circumstances of the accident, but witnesses passing by the scene state that father and son were arguing moments before the tragedy. Sheriff Liam Parker declared that the case will be treated as vehicular homicide, since the minor was driving the vehicle without a license and under the father's authorization. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the paper. I read and reread those lines, unable to believe what I was seeing. Stephen was driving, not Ernest. Stephen was driving the car when the accident happened. The world around me seemed to spin. Memories of the accident began to come back, no longer blurred by guilt and manipulation, but crystal clear like spring water. Yes, that Sunday, after visiting the ranch, Ernest had allowed Stephen to drive back, something he occasionally did so his son could practice. I was in the back seat as the news said. The argument started when Ernest criticized Stephen for skipping classes. And then, the accident. How could I have forgotten this? How had I allowed Stephen to completely reverse the truth, making me believe for 10 long years that the fault was mine? The sound of the shower inside the house stopped. In a panic, I folded the clipping and put it back in the secret compartment. I took the money for the electric bill, closed the wallet, and returned it to the glove compartment exactly as I had found it. When Stephen came out of the bathroom, I was already back in the kitchen, sitting at the table with the money in front of me and a whirlwind in my head. "Found the money?" he asked, drying his hair with a towel. "Yes," I replied softly, avoiding looking directly at him. I feared my eyes would reveal that I knew, that I finally knew. "Good. Don't forget to pay today, and keep the receipt to show me." He dressed quickly, took the keys, and left, not without giving me his usual warning. "Don't open the door for anyone, and don't leave the house except to pay the bill." As soon as I heard the car driving away, I collapsed into a chair, trembling from head to toe. The tears came, not from sadness or pain, but from anger. An anger I had never felt before, not even in the worst moments with Ernest. 10 years, I whispered to the empty kitchen. 10 years believing I was guilty. I remembered every humiliation, every accusation, every look of contempt. I remembered the nights I had cried myself to sleep, begging Ernest for forgiveness, tormented by guilt. I remembered the accusing looks from people in town, the whispers, the isolation, and all based on a lie. A monstrous lie created by my own son to rid himself of his guilt, transferring it to me. At that moment, sitting alone in that kitchen, something inside me transformed. The broken and submissive woman who had accepted that life of atonement began to give way to another person, someone I didn't know, but who perhaps had always existed within me, waiting to emerge. I left the house and went to the bank to pay the electric bill, as Stephen had ordered. The teller, a young man who didn't know me, treated me with the automatic politeness he dispensed to everyone. There was no pity or accusation in his eyes, only the indifference of someone doing their job. On the way back, I stopped in front of the church. It was empty at that time of morning, just an elderly lady praying in one of the front pews. I sat in the last pew and stayed there, looking at the altar, at the image of Our Lady of Sorrows. "What do I do now?" I asked in silence. No answer came, just the echo of my own thoughts. My first idea was to confront Stephen immediately. To throw the truth in his face, demand explanations, make him feel at least a little of the pain I had felt all these years. But something held me back. Fear, perhaps, or the intuition that this wouldn't be the wisest path. Stephen had built his life on that lie. He had convinced himself of his own version of the facts to the point of completely believing it. A direct confrontation could lead to unpredictable consequences. And I was alone, without allies, without proof beyond that newspaper clipping hidden in his wallet. I returned home and spent the rest of the day in a state of numbness, moving automatically between household chores, while my mind was bubbling with possibilities and plans. That night, I had a vivid dream about my grandmother Carmen. She was standing by the loom, working on a rug with patterns I had never seen before. "Look closely, Betty," she said in her characteristic Spanglish. "Each thread has its place. Each knot has its purpose. When the weave is wrong, there's no point in continuing to weave over it. You have to undo everything and start over." I woke before dawn, with her words still echoing in my mind. I got up and went to the window. The town was still asleep, but the first lights were beginning to appear in the houses. Normal people starting another normal day of their normal lives. I looked at my hands, now with some age spots and more prominent veins. Hands that had cradled Stephen as a baby, that had cared for him when sick, that had stroked his hair after nightmares. The same hands that he now despised, that he accused of having caused his father's death. And then, as if some greater force were guiding my thoughts, I began to develop a plan. It wouldn't be a direct confrontation, no. It would be something more subtle, more devastating. Something that would not only free me from the imposed guilt, but that would do justice in a way that no explosion of anger could achieve. The following Sunday would be Stephen's 28th birthday. Claire, now with her pregnancy advanced, was organizing a lunch at their house. Her family would be present, as well as Stephen's uncle, Ernest's brother, who always looked at me with that mix of pity and contempt. Some close friends would also come. It would be the perfect setting. During the days that followed, I acted normally when Stephen appeared. I continued to be the submissive and guilty mother he expected to see. But inside, I was different. Each time he looked at me with that contempt, each time he made a cruel comment about the accident, I would just smile internally thinking, Sunday, wait until Sunday. On the Friday before the lunch, Stephen came to pick me up to go to town. "We need to buy a decent dress for you," he said. "I don't want you showing up at my birthday in those old lady clothes." We went to the only fine clothing store in Brownsville. The saleswoman, a young woman who must have been newly hired, didn't know me. She treated me with the professional kindness she dispensed to all customers. It was a strange feeling to be treated like a normal person after so many years of accusatory looks. Stephen chose a dark blue dress, sober and discreet. "This one," he said simply, not even bothering to ask my opinion. "Go try it on." In the fitting room, I looked at myself in the mirror. The dress was beautiful, but it made me look even older and more faded than I already felt. Perfect for a repentant criminal, I thought bitterly. When I returned to the store floor, Stephen nodded with approval. "It will do. At least you won't embarrass anyone like this." He paid for the dress and we left. On the way back, he talked about the lunch, about how I should behave. Stay quiet most of the time. If someone starts a conversation, answer the bare minimum necessary. And if they ask about the accident— "I know, son," I interrupted gently. "I say it was a terrible moment and that I thank God every day that you survived." He looked at me sideways, surprised by my docility. For an instant, I was afraid I had overdone it, that I had raised suspicions. But he just nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. At least you learn after so much time." On Saturday, the eve of the big day, Stephen stopped by the house to check if I had everything I needed for the lunch. "Do you have a gift for me?" he asked, with that false casualness that barely disguised the demand. "Of course, son," I replied. "I bought something special with the money you gave me last month. It's saved for tomorrow." He smiled, that smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good. I'll come get you at 11 o'clock sharp. Be ready." After he left, I sat in the living room chair and stared at the wall for a long time. Fear and doubt tried to infiltrate my plan. What if he denied everything? What if no one believed me? What if this only made my situation worse? "No," I said aloud to the empty room. "I can't continue living like this, not one more day." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced around the house, mentally reviewing every detail of my plan. When the sun finally began to appear on the horizon, I went to the bedroom and put on the blue dress Stephen had bought. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the guilty and defeated woman he had created. I saw Betty Graham Williams, daughter of Isaac and Dorothy, granddaughter of Carmen, the weaver. At 11 o'clock sharp, I heard the horn of Stephen's car. I picked up my purse where I had put a small package, the supposed birthday gift. But inside the purse was also something else, well hidden in the lining, a copy of the newspaper clipping I had found in his wallet. Yes, a copy. The previous afternoon, while Stephen was busy with preparations for the lunch, I had gone to the offices of the Brownsville Chronicle. It was a small building in the center of town, where few knew me now. I asked to speak with the archivist, an elderly gentleman who didn't seem to recognize me. "I need a copy of an old edition," I explained. "From May 22nd, 1986. He grumbled something about having to search through the archives, but eventually found it. I paid for a copy of the page containing the news of the accident and left quickly before anyone could see me. Now, sitting in the car beside Stephen, I felt the weight of that paper in my purse. It was as if I were carrying a bomb about to explode. "You're quiet today," observed Stephen, as we drove to his house. "Just a bit nervous," I replied honestly. "It's been a long time since I participated in a gathering like this." He gave a short laugh. "Just stay in your corner, as always. Nobody expects much from you anyway." We arrived at his house, a beautiful and modern construction on the other side of town. Several cars were already parked in front. Claire welcomed us at the door, her 7-month belly quite visible under the flowery dress. "Mrs. Williams, I'm so glad you came," she said, with that polite and distant kindness. "Please, come in." The living room was full. I recognized Claire's parents, Stephen's uncle, some close friends of his. Everyone looked at me when I entered, and I could feel the weight of those looks. Pity, curiosity, discomfort, and, in some, that silent condemnation that had accompanied me for 10 years. "Let's go to the table," announced Claire. "Lunch is already served." I sat in the place indicated to me at the farthest end of the table, far from Stephen, who occupied the head as the host and birthday celebrant. The lunch proceeded with pleasant conversations about the weather, local politics, the expectation for the baby on the way. No one addressed me directly, except when absolutely necessary. After dessert, a flan that Claire had made especially for Stephen, came the time for toasts and gifts. Each guest stood up, made a small speech praising Stephen, and delivered their gift. When my turn came, I felt all eyes turned to me. I rose slowly, my legs trembling beneath the blue dress. "Son," I began, with a firmer voice than I expected, "I have a special gift for you today." I took the small package from my purse and placed it on the table. Stephen smiled, that smile of superiority that had hurt me so much over the years. "Thank you, Mom," he said, without opening the package. "I'm sure it's something adequate." It was at this moment that I made the final decision, the point of no return. "Actually," I continued, "my real gift is something I found recently, something I think everyone here should see." Stephen's smile faltered. I took the newspaper clipping from my purse and placed it on the table. "I think that's enough, Stephen," I said, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "Why don't you tell the family what really happened the day your father died? Or, if you prefer, we can read the newspaper article together." A deathly silence fell over the dining room. All eyes turned to the yellowed newspaper clipping I had placed on the table, then to me, and finally to Stephen. My son seemed to have turned into a pillar of salt. His face, previously flushed from wine and celebration, was now as white as paper. His eyes, fixed on the yellowed clipping, widened in pure panic. It was the first time in 10 years that I saw him vulnerable, disarmed. "What nonsense is this, Mom?" he finally managed to say, trying to maintain his composure. His voice, normally firm and controlled, now trembled slightly. "Are you confused again?" Claire, seated beside him, looked from one to the other without understanding. "What's happening, Stephen?" It was Stephen's uncle, August, Ernest's brother, who broke the impasse. He stretched out his arm and took the clipping, adjusting his glasses to read. I saw his expression change as he absorbed the words. Shock, confusion, and finally, a growing anger took over his face. "Stephen," he said slowly, "what does this mean? This news says you were driving the car when Ernest died." Claire's father, seated to my right, leaned over to read over August's shoulder. His reaction was equally one of astonishment. "But you always said your mother caused the accident," he murmured, looking at Stephen with a mixture of confusion and distrust. Stephen stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "This is a lie!" he shouted, pointing to the newspaper. "Fake news! Mom fabricated this to rid herself of guilt." "The Brownsville Chronicle of May 22nd, 1986, I responded calmly. "You can check in the archives, as I did yesterday. Or perhaps you'd like to show everyone the original you keep hidden in your wallet in a secret compartment." His eyes widened even more. The blow had hit home. At that moment, I realized that everyone at the table was beginning to understand what was happening. Years of a carefully constructed lie were crumbling before our eyes. "You've been keeping this in your wallet all this time?" asked Claire, her voice almost a whisper. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, as if wanting to protect the baby. "It's not what you're thinking," Stephen tried to defend himself, looking around, seeking some ally. "It was a newspaper error. They corrected it later. I keep this as a reminder of how the press can distort facts." "A correction?" I asked, still with that calmness that surprised me. "Then there must be another article, correcting this one. We can go to the newspaper right now to check." August stood up. He was a big man, with the same strong features as Ernest. "Stephen, look me in the eye and tell the truth. Were you driving the car when my brother died?" Time seemed suspended. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the answer. Stephen scanned the table, assessing the situation, looking for a way out. Finally, his shoulders fell in defeat. "It was an accident," he muttered. "Dad had given me permission to drive. The road was wet. I lost control. It wasn't my fault." "Hi, and blaming me for 10 years?" I asked, my voice finally breaking. "Making me believe I had killed your father? Was that an accident too?" Claire let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hands. The other guests looked at each other, embarrassed, some already discreetly rising, ready to leave that explosive situation. "You don't understand," said Stephen, now on the defensive. "I was just a kid. I was 17 years old. Everyone looked at me as if I had killed my father on purpose. The police wanted to prosecute me. I couldn't handle that pressure." "So you transferred all the guilt to your mother," concluded August, his voice laden with disgust. "Let everyone think Betty was responsible, including me. God, how could I have been so blind?" "Uncle, please," Stephen pleaded. "It was so long ago. I was practically a child." "And the last 10 years?" asked Claire's father. "You weren't a child anymore. You were a grown man perpetuating this lie." "Stephen," Claire spoke up, her face washed in tears. "How could you do this to your own mother? How could you lie to all of us for all these years? To me?" The room seemed to spin around me. After so long living under the weight of that lie, seeing it exposed before everyone was almost surreal. I saw on the face of each person present the same process happening: reevaluation, understanding, and finally, horror at what had been done to me. "I think I'll be going," I said, standing up. My legs trembled, but I managed to stay on my feet. "I've said what I needed to say." "No, stay," said August, approaching and holding my hands. "Betty, I ask forgiveness for everything. I believed. We all believed." "There's nothing to forgive," I replied sincerely. "You were deceived as much as I was." I looked at Stephen. He was seated again, his face buried in his hands. At that moment, I couldn't feel anger toward him, only a deep, deep sadness. For what he had done, for what we had lost, for the son I knew and who had somehow been lost along the way. "Mom," he said, finally looking at me, There were tears in his eyes, the first genuine tears I had seen in him since he was a child. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this." "There is no fixing it," I replied simply. "But the truth is finally out there, and that's a beginning." I left that house with my head held high, without waiting for Stephen to take me back. I took a taxi at the corner, a luxury I never allowed myself, and asked to be taken to my sister Nancy's house in San Antonio. I needed distance, time to think, a place where I could breathe without the weight of Stephen's lie suffocating me. Nancy almost fainted when she saw me at the door of her house that night. First from surprise at the unexpected visit, then from shock when I told her everything that had happened. My sister had always suspected something wasn't right, but she had never imagined the extent of Stephen's lie. "You're going to stay here with me for as long as necessary," she declared, preparing the guest room. "You should have come a long time ago." I spent 2 weeks at Nancy's house, recovering emotionally. It was like emerging from a long and terrible nightmare. For the first time in 10 years, I could breathe without feeling the weight of guilt on my shoulders. I slept without nightmares, woke without that feeling of despair. During this time, I received several unexpected visits. August came personally to ask forgiveness, bringing with him documents that Ernest had left and that Stephen had never shown me, including a substantial life insurance policy in my name that had never been claimed. "Betty, this belongs to you by right," he said, handing me the papers. "I'll help with all the bureaucracy. It's the least I can do after having believed that lie for so long." Some ladies from the Brownsville church also came, embarrassed and remorseful. The news of the revelation had spread through town like wildfire. The story of the widow who, for 10 years, had been falsely accused by her own son of killing her husband was the topic in all coffee circles, in all markets and pharmacies. "Mrs. Williams, we had no idea," said Mrs. Thompson, president of the Ladies' Association at the church. "We thought, well, what everyone thought. Please forgive us." Claire also appeared, alone, her belly now even more prominent. She sat with me on Nancy's porch and cried for a long time before she could speak. "He lied to me during our entire relationship," she finally said. "I thought I knew my husband, but now, I don't know who he is." I held her hands in mine. Despite everything, she too was a victim in this story. "Stephen is still the same man you met," I said gently. "But he carries a terrible burden of guilt and lies. Perhaps now, with everything revealed, he can finally face this and change." "I don't know if I can stay with him," she confessed, caressing her belly. "I don't know if I can trust him again." "You need to do what you feel is right," I replied, "for you and your baby." After 2 weeks, I decided it was time to resume my life. But I wouldn't return to that house in Brownsville, full of painful memories. With the money from Ernest's life insurance, I bought a small house in the old part of town, near the river, not far from where I had grown up. When I returned to Brownsville, the town received me differently. There were no more accusatory looks or whispers behind my back. Instead, I found hesitant smiles, respectful greetings, a community ashamed by its hasty judgment and anxious to compensate. In the first week in my new house, I received a visit from Mrs. Smith, from the general store where I used to sell my knitting work hidden from Stephen. "Mrs. Williams," she said, observing the still empty rooms of my new house. "I heard you weave and do natural dyeing. My store is in need of pieces like that, quality handcrafted items. Would you be interested in supplying for us?" It was the opportunity I needed. I could finally use the skills my grandmother Carmen had taught me. I could be independent, create my own livelihood, recover a little of what had been mine before everything collapsed. "Yes, Mrs. Smith," I replied with a genuine smile. "I am very interested." In the months that followed, I transformed one of the rooms of the house into my studio. I bought a vertical loom, balls of natural wool, plants to make my own dyes. At 45, I was starting from scratch, reinventing myself as an artisan. And as for Stephen, the truth is that it took a very long time until we could establish any kind of relationship again. He tried to visit me several times in the first few weeks, but I wasn't ready to see him yet. It was Claire who, ironically, ended up bringing us closer again. She decided to stay with Stephen, but with one condition. He needed to go to therapy to face his demons, his guilt, his tendency to manipulate and control. And he also needed to rebuild his relationship with me, if I allowed it. When my grandson Gabriel was born, I received a call from the hospital. It was Claire, inviting me to meet the baby. I hesitated, but something inside me, perhaps that part that never stopped being a mother, despite everything, made me go. At the hospital, I found Stephen sitting next to the bed where Claire rested with the baby in her arms. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes red from crying. "Mom," he said simply, his voice choked. I looked at my son, the man who had hurt me so much, but who was still flesh of my flesh, and then at the small bundle in Claire's arms. "Would you like to hold your grandson?" she asked, extending the baby to me. I took that delicate little creature in my arms and felt something awaken inside me. A tenderness that I thought had been destroyed, a capacity to love that I thought I had lost. "Gabriel," said Stephen, cautiously approaching. "That's his name, Gabriel Isaac, in honor of my grandfather. My father. He had given his son my father's name." I raised my eyes, meeting Stephen's gaze. There were no words that could erase what had been done. There were no apologies sufficient to heal that wound. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path forward. "It's a beautiful name," I replied, looking back at the baby. "And he's perfect." From that day on, we began to rebuild some kind of relationship. Not the same as before, that would be impossible, but something new, fragile, and careful. Stephen continued his therapy. I learned later that he had finally confronted his guilt over the accident, the trauma of having been responsible for his father's death, and how it had destroyed him inside, leading him to transfer that unbearable guilt to me. It wasn't an easy path. There were relapses, moments when the old dynamic threatened to return. But with time, and especially with Gabriel's presence, things improved. My small crafts business began to prosper. The people of Brownsville, perhaps driven by guilt or genuine admiration, bought my rugs and blankets. Soon, tourists visiting the town also became interested in the naturally dyed pieces with the colors of the Texas plains. I expanded to the neighboring town of Matamoros, in Mexico, the birthplace of my grandmother Carmen. The skills she had taught me, combining techniques from both sides of the border, made my work unique. I began giving small workshops, teaching other women the art of natural dyeing and weaving. It was during this period that I met Ms. Magdalene, a Mexican lady who had been a friend of my grandmother in her youth. She became my companion on trips to the riverside to collect plants for dyeing, on long afternoons at the loom, in conversations about the old days when the border was more a formality than a division. "Carmen would be proud of you," she would tell me, observing my rugs with colorful patterns inspired by the local landscape. "She always knew you had this gift in your hands." At 50, I was finally able to fulfill the dream of buying a small piece of land by the river, where I built a simple but welcoming house. The view of the Rio Grande, with Mexico on the other side, brought me a feeling of peace I had never experienced before. It was as if, finally, I had found my place in the world. As the years passed, I gradually forgave Stephen, not for what he deserved, but for what I needed. Forgiveness was not for him. It was for myself. To be able to move forward without the weight of resentment, to be able to enjoy my grandson's company without the shadow of the past separating us. Stephen was never again the same arrogant and controlling man as before. The exposure of his lie had broken him in a way no one could have predicted, but little by little, he was also rebuilding himself, in a more humble, more honest way. Gabriel grew up as a bridge between us. He loved coming to my house by the river, learning about the plants I used for dyeing, hearing stories about his great-grandmother Carmen and her weaving techniques. And so, step by step, day by day, I wove a new life for myself. Not perfect, not without scars, but genuinely mine. A life based on truth, independence, dignity recovered. Truth, my dears, was not just my revenge against the lie that had imprisoned me for so long. It was also my liberation. And in some unexpected way, it ended up being a liberation for Stephen too. As an old border saying goes, truth is like the sun. For a time it may be covered by clouds, but it always ends up coming out and shining. Block 5. Present day and conclusion. And so I arrive at my present days, my dear viewers. Here I am, at 72 years old, in my little house by the Rio Grande, waking up every morning to the view of the water that separates the United States and Mexico, but which deep down unites more than it divides. My routine is simple, but it brings me a satisfaction I never imagined I could feel after everything I lived through. I wake up with the first rays of sun, an old habit I inherited from my father, who used to say that whoever loses the morning loses the entire day. I prepare my sweet tea the way I like it and sit on the porch to appreciate the movement of the river. The waters of the Rio Grande have 1,000 different colors depending on the light, the time of day, the weather. Sometimes silver gray when the sky is cloudy, sometimes deep blue on sunny days, sometimes golden at sunset. All these colors end up in my rugs and blankets, as if the river lent its tones to my loom. My studio is in the brightest room of the house, with large windows facing east, capturing all the morning light. There I have my vertical loom, already the third one, as the other two wore out with use over the years. The shelves are full of colorful yarns, all dyed by me, using techniques I've refined over time. What began as a small survival business has transformed into something I never imagined. My rugs, memories of the border, as I called them, honoring the Spanish of my grandmother, are now known not only here in the region, but in places I've never visited. I have pieces in stores in San Antonio, Houston, and even in New York. 10 years ago, a journalist from a decoration magazine discovered my work during a trip along the border. She did a beautiful report with colorful photos of my pieces and my little house by the river. After that, the orders never stopped coming. "You need a website, Grandma," Gabriel, my grandson, told me at the time, when he was 18 and already understood everything about computers. "I'll make one for you to show your work." And thus my small virtual store was born, which Gabriel manages to this day. Who would have thought that I, an old woman from the border, would have my creations navigating the so-called internet? Life is indeed a box of surprises. But I don't work alone. Over the years, I've formed a small group of artisans, women from here in Brownsville and also from Matamoros on the Mexican side. We meet twice a week in my studio to work together, share techniques, and, of course, have sweet tea and catch up on conversation. Among them is Dorothy. Yes, I gave her my mother's name. A young woman of just 22 who has shown extraordinary talent for dyeing. She reminds me a lot of myself in my youth, only with opportunities I never had. I've been passing on to her all the secrets I learned from my grandmother Carmen, adding those I discovered throughout my own journey. "Mrs. Betty, you should write a book with all these dyeing recipes," she keeps telling me. Maybe one day, right? For now, I prefer to teach in person, smelling the plants boiling in the pots, seeing eyes light up when the white yarn emerges from the water completely transformed into a unique shade of red, blue, or yellow. Gabriel, my grandson, is now a 28-year-old man. He graduated in graphic design in Houston, but returned to Brownsville to be closer to family. He set up a small studio in town, where he works with clients from all over the United States via the internet. He comes to have lunch with me every Sunday, without fail. "Grandma, I made that beef stew you taught me, but it's not as good as yours," he always complains, although he already cooks better than I do. "What's the secret?" "The secret, my boy, is to add love," I reply, and he rolls his eyes, but I know he understands what I mean. Gabriel has become the grandson any grandmother would wish to have. Attentive, affectionate, interested in stories from the past. Sometimes we sit together in my studio and, while I weave, he records our conversations. "I'm documenting everything, Grandma," he explains. "The dyeing recipes, the border stories, the memories of great-grandma Carmen. This is cultural heritage, you know?" My relationship with Stephen has also found its balance over the years. It's not the relationship we had before the accident, nor could it be. Some wounds leave permanent scars, but it's a respectful relationship in which we both acknowledge the mistakes of the past and choose to move forward. He and Claire are still together, living in the same house on the other side of town. Stephen retired from the construction materials store a few years ago, passing it to a younger partner. Now he dedicates part of his time to a community project that helps at-risk youth. It's as if he's trying to compensate somehow for the mistakes he made. Every special date, birthdays, Christmas, Easter, we gather at my house by the river. Stephen always arrives bringing some gift, usually special wools he finds on his travels or rare plants for my dyes. We talk about the weather, sometimes about politics, about Gabriel, about the news in town. We don't talk about the past. It's not necessary. We both know what happened, and we both have chosen, each in our own way, to make peace with it. People here in town treat me with a special respect nowadays. I'm known as Ms. Betty the Weaver or Ms. Betty of the Dyes. Some of the older ladies, who once turned their faces away from me believing Stephen's lie, now invite me for coffee and to exchange recipes. "You're an example of overcoming, Ms. Betty," they tell me, and I just smile. I don't hold grudges. Life has already taught me that anger and resentment are too heavy burdens to carry in old age. My sister Nancy still lives in San Antonio, now a widow like me. We talk on the phone almost every day, and she comes to visit whenever she can. Her youngest grandson is studying to be a teacher and sometimes comes to spend time with me to learn about the history of the border. "Aunt Betty has more stories to tell than any book," he tells his friends. My brother Samuel left us 5 years ago, a victim of a heart problem. But before departing, he returned to live in Brownsville, and we spent good moments remembering our childhood, the games on the riverbank, the stories our father told on winter nights. Life today has a tranquility that I appreciate. There are no more heavy secrets, no more unjust guilt, no more that constant feeling of being trapped in an escapeless trap. I have my small difficulties, of course. Age brings its challenges. My fingers are not as agile on the loom as before, my knees complain with changes in the weather, my glasses need to be changed more frequently. But these are just reminders that life follows its natural course, like the river that passes by my window. Sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. On market days, when I exhibit my work in the central square of Brownsville, someone always comes to ask about the colors, about the techniques. "How do you get such a special shade of orange?" they ask. And I explain about the onion skin, about the boiling time, about the ash mordant I use to fix the color. But I don't tell all the secrets. Some are saved for my official apprentices, like Dorothy. At night, when the movement of the day ends, I like to sit again on the porch with a sweet tea and observe the lights of Matamoros on the other side of the river. I think of my grandmother Carmen, who made the reverse journey crossing that same water to come to the United States. I think of the cycles of life, of the turns the world takes. Sometimes, Gabriel joins me in these nightly contemplations. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" he asks, sitting in the rocking chair next to mine. "About how life is like a great rug," I reply. "We weave, day by day, without really seeing the pattern we're forming. Only when we look back can we see the complete design." He smiles, understanding. Gabriel has that sensitivity, perhaps inherited from me, perhaps developed on his own in his profession as a designer. "And do you like what you see when you look back, Grandma?" I reflect for a moment, observing the stars that are beginning to appear in the sky, the outlines of the trees that become shadows against the horizon, the river that continues its eternal path. "I like it," I finally reply. "I wouldn't change anything, not even the difficult parts, because they were what brought me here, to this porch, to this moment with you. And it's true, my dear viewers. Each line on my face, each white hair on my head, each callus on my hands tells a story. Of pain, yes, but also of overcoming, of reframing, of transforming suffering into something beautiful, as I do with my dyes, transforming simple plants into vibrant colors. Here in Brownsville, in the same town where I was born, I finally found the place where I belong. Not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as myself. Betty, the border weaver, the woman who transformed her story of pain into colors and textures that warm homes across the country. And if there's one lesson I can leave for you, it's this. Truth always finds its way to the light, like the water of the river always finds its way to the sea. It may take time, it may be painful, but when it finally emerges, it brings with it the possibility of a new life, truly our own. My dear ones who have accompanied me this far, I want to share something special with you. Come with me to my studio for a moment. See this vertical loom in the afternoon light. It's here that I transform loose threads into woven stories. You know, each rug I create begins with the choice of threads and colors. Some threads are rough, difficult to work with, hurt the fingers. They are like the hard moments of life. Ernest's abuse, Stephen's lies, the years living under the weight of a guilt that wasn't mine. Other threads are soft, glide smoothly between the fingers, like moments of joy. Gabriel's birth, the rediscovery of my art, the freedom to finally live without that shadow. When I started weaving my first rug after the revelation of the truth, my hands were trembling so much that the first few inches came out crooked and irregular. Looking at it now, I could undo that part, start over, and seek perfection. But I never do that. Those imperfect knots are part of the rug's story, just as my scars are part of my history. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to begin again each day, to pass the shuttle once more between the threads, even when fingers ache and eyes grow tired. Like that day when, at 45, I set up my first loom in my new house, determined to build a life that was truly my own. My wrinkles are maps of survival, each one telling a story of pain overcome. Look at my hands, these spots, these calluses, these prominent veins. They are hands that have suffered, yes, but they are also hands that have created beauty from pain. Like the dyes I make, transforming simple plants into vibrant colors. Life has taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out completely. On the darkest days, when Stephen convinced me I was guilty for Ernest's death, there was a small voice inside me, perhaps the voice of my grandmother Carmen, whispering that one day the truth would come to light. I never allowed my dignity to be completely stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. When Stephen tore up the blanket I was making for Gabriel before his birth, something in me refused to be completely broken. Like a warped thread that, even when tensioned to the maximum, refuses to snap. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. On the morning I found that newspaper clipping in Stephen's wallet, I felt as if the weight of the universe was on my shoulders. How would I confront 10 years of lies? Where would I find the courage? And yet, I found strength where I thought there was nothing left. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. The years haven't completely erased the pain of that period in my life, just as the sun doesn't completely fade the colors of my natural dyes. But we learn to incorporate these marks into a larger and more beautiful design. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. When I decided to confront Stephen at that birthday lunch, I was choosing not to be a victim anymore, but the author of my own story. Like when I decide what pattern to weave, what colors to use, what textures to explore. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. When I returned to Brownsville after that revelation, many people expected me to be bitter and vengeful, but I chose the harder path, that of reconstruction, not destruction. like untying a knot without breaking the thread, delicate, patient, determined. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows we can flourish even after the storm. The most vivid dyes, often come from plants that survive droughts or frosts, as if adversity intensified their essence. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. Remember that journalist who discovered my work? At first, I hesitated to tell my story. Who will want to hear the problems of an old woman from the border, I thought. But when I finally spoke, I realized my words could touch other people trapped in their own invisible prisons. Age has given me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. At 45, when many think life is already defined, I was just discovering who I really was. Like a ball of wool that waits patiently for decades until the right hands transform it into something beautiful. My experience has taught me that our story doesn't end with the painful chapters. If it did, my life's rug would have only dark shades of gray and brown. But look at the vibrant colors that came afterward. The blue of the river outside my window, the green of recovered friendships, the bright red of rediscovered passion for my craft. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each piece I create and sell with my name, each apprentice I teach, each genuine smile I give are small victories against those dark years. They are living proof that Betty, the real Betty, not only survived, but flourished. If you who are listening to me now are trapped in a situation that seems hopeless, if you carry guilt that may not be yours, if you live under the control of someone who distorts your reality, I want to say, seek help. Tell your story to someone you trust. Truth, like a well-spun wool thread, may seem fragile alone, but when interwoven with the support of others, it becomes strong enough to weave a new life. In any country, in any culture, human dignity is a fundamental right. Like the basic weaving techniques that repeat in traditions around the world, different patterns, same principles. No one deserves to live under abuse or manipulation. No one should carry guilt that doesn't belong to them. Our global community strengthens when we protect the most vulnerable, when we offer genuine listening, when we believe the stories of pain that are so often silenced. Like a community loom where each person adds their own threads, creating something greater than anyone could do alone. And now, my dears, before we say goodbye, I want to make a special request. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. Each subscription is like a new thread added to the loom of this community we're building together. People who understand that our stories of overcoming matter. And leave in the comments the word freedom if you watched until here. This will be our secret code, our way of recognizing each other as people who believe in the transformative power of truth. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Just as a single knot can change the pattern of an entire rug, a single action from you can completely change the fate of someone who is suffering in silence. Remember, we are all weavers of our own story, but sometimes we need the help of others to see the true pattern we are creating. From my little house by the Rio Grande, with my 72 years of stories to tell and my colorful rugs to weave, I say goodbye with a heart full of gratitude for having listened to me. May the colors of truth and freedom illuminate the path of each of you as they illuminated mine.